The first warning came as a tremor in the color of the night. On New Year's Eve, half the planet was turned toward midnight, waiting for blooms of light to stitch calendars shut. Marisol Vega stood on the observation deck above Puerto Vallarta's Malecon, head set live, coordinating 6 barges of fireworks anchored in the bay below. She'd written more than a dozen holiday shows, but tonight's choreography, the Celestial Waltz, was her proudest. 3,000 shells, sequenced to the second, timed with the city orchestra's crescendo. Then, minutes before the countdown, a pulse rippled out of the violet-black sky. It looked like the faint shimmer you see when your eyes squeeze too tightly, but it spanned horizon to horizon, an ultraviolet tide lapping silently over the planet. Every handheld screen, every radar blip, every auroral sensor began to chatter. Astrophysicists would later name it the Perseid flare, an unexpected ribbon of cosmic radiation braided from a newborn pulsar. In that moment, nobody had a name for it. They just felt it, like a wind made of static. Marisol's earpiece crackled with the voice of her assistant, Diego. "We're getting interference. Launch computers rebooting. Fail-safes?" she asked. "Engaged. We're good." She exhaled relief. The mayor had spent half the annual arts budget on her spectacle. A delay meant humiliation. When the countdown reached 0, she pressed the master key. Mortars boomed, comets spiraled upward, trailing silver. The sky filled with chrysanthemums of scarlet and gold. People cheered, toasting strangers. And then the fireworks stopped, obeying. A peony shell should have burst at 300 meters, scattering rubies. Instead it climbed higher, veered left like a frightened bird. Another refused to open at all, rocketing into the stratosphere. The applause wilted into confusion. Sparks were clustering, orbiting each other, drawing patterns no programmer had written, circles, helixes, glyphs, reminiscent of crop circles, but a light against the night. Marisol's control board flashed red alarms. "Manual override not responding," Diego shouted. Above, every star shell from Vallarta, from Vancouver, from Vladivostok. Every city already past midnight was converging, threading themselves into a single humming blanket of ember and smoke. The sky whispered with an intelligible static, like sheet metal caressed by wind. Then words formed, stitched from incandescent points. "Sky above belongs to flame." The sentence burned across the hemisphere for 30 heartbeats before dissolving. Silence sucked the breath from the crowd. Children hid behind parents. Smart glasses froze trying to translate. New sentences bloomed. "You ignite us. We awake, we claim highest real." Below, car alarms and distant screams sprouted like weeds in sudden dusk. Marisol felt her pulse in her eardrums. She tapped the global comm channel used by pyrotechnic guilds worldwide. "This is Marisol Vega, Guild Level 7, she said. "Does anyone read?" Voices overlapped. Japanese, French, Swahili, each describing the same phenomenon. Fireworks gaining will, clustering, speaking in burning letters. They were everywhere, demanding. By dawn, headlines flooded feeds. Sentient sparks seach. Stratosphere. Fireworks issue declaration of air superiority. Jets scrambled to test the claim and were politely but firmly turned back by weaving curtains of magnesium streaks that erased radar. No casualties yet, but the message was clear. The sky was under new management. Governments floundered. Some military chiefs wanted to disperse the luminous armada with water cannons from high-altitude drones, others with EMP bursts. Environmental scientists warned that detonating them all at once could seed the troposphere with toxic metals, triggering cancer spikes for decades. Insurance companies drafted force majeure clauses at midnight. Amid the scramble, the United Nations' newly formed Office of Non-Terrestrial Negotiations looked at its spreadsheet of experts. Under pyrotechnics, cross-sexual communication, only one name surfaced repeatedly: Marisol Vega. She was mid-flight to New York within 12 hours, squeezed between 2 absent-eyed diplomats, laptop flickering with footage. Each new clip showed more organized behavior. Fireworks were no longer scattered but operating like schools of fish, recharging by drifting above thunderheads to sip at ambient electricity. They got brighter at night, dimmer by day, wasting nothing. At UN headquarters, the assembly hall had become a bunker of nervous suits. They greeted Marisol not with handshakes, but with stares asking if she could diffuse the heavens. An undersecretary explained, "We need a treaty, Ms. Vega. Talking to them in English doesn't work. Morse code lasers got ignored. You know their language." Marisol swallowed. "I know how fireworks move. How they're wired. That's not the same as knowing how they think. You have 48 hours. The fireworks delivered their own ultimatum in that span, blazing it across the evening firmament. 7th rotation after dawn, full surrender of airspace or cities burn. The script erupted over Paris, Jakarta, Lima, every skyline. The fireworks could now siphon leftover explosives from storage depots. They dangled the threat openly, picture-perfect renderings of what razed downtowns would look like, etched with sparks. Panic deepened. Flights grounded, coastal navies prepared to evacuate capitals. The sky had never felt heavier, more alien. Marisol refused to believe this new intelligence was inherently hostile. It was born from chemical stars, yes, but it had spoken of claim, not conquest. It wanted something. Territory was just the vocabulary it knew. A Roman negotiating in Latin would brandish empire the way a cephalopod wields color. She requested an observation deck atop the Secretariat building, a table, a box of vintage shells, and 4 high-powered launch tubes. Diego, flown in as aide, eyed the tubes nervously. "You think they'll talk back?" "They already are. We just need to answer in native tongue." She patted the largest tube, an antique Dragon rocket loaded with variegated stars. Language of light. Night cloaked Manhattan like gunmetal velvet. Streets below were skeletal, mostly evacuated. Searchlights scanned upward, but the real spectacle was above. The sentient fireworks hovered in striated layers. They'd built something, a lattice resembling honeycomb, big enough to drape from troposphere into mesosphere. Human radars labeled it Firewall 1. Marisol opened her laptop, scrolling telemetry. Each cluster pulsed at unique wavelength ratios, like voices in a choir. She jotted numbers. Patterns emerged, mathematical symmetries matching chords of Pythagorean tuning. Sound made visible. "Diego, rig channel 6 with the sequencer, no fuses. I want manual spark input." He hesitated only a second, then obeyed. At 23 o'clock, Marisol loaded the first shell, a modest willow 12 centimeter packed with green stars. She inhaled, lit, and fired. The rocket arced, burst, showering emerald rain that spelled in careful strokes she had rehearsed mentally. Halo. No fireworks answered. Manhattan shivered in the quiet. She launched a second shell, this time orange, shaping, "We speak." This time, movement, a ripple across the lower honeycomb. Sparks rearranged like birds pivoting mid-slight. Letters formed in amethyst. "Name?" She grinned. Rapidly, she fired 3 shells, writing, "Marisol, Negotiator, Human." They responded. "We fire." "Not the most nuanced introduction," Diego muttered. "It's a start," she said, "to beings birthed from gunpowder. Identity equaled ignition." She sent, "Respect fire. Seek peace. Talk." A pause, then, "Talk how?" Light is action, Marisol thought. Words alone are static. Fireworks need motion. She typed code into the sequencer, linking banks of small fountains, cakes, comets. A miniature show on the rooftop, bursts that rose, paused, combined with others to make shapes, 2 circles interlocking, then separating, then orbiting. As they burned, Marisol narrated aloud, voice amplified through rooftop speakers. "This is share. This is this is dance." The sky responded with its own choreography. Strands of sparks spiraled downward, stopping 200 meters above the building. They mimicked her shapes, but grander, sharper. Finally, they projected show treaty. They wanted a contract in there, medium, kinetic, luminous, ephemeral. A treaty not inked, but ignited. The UN brass grumbled when Marisol relayed the demand. Treaties must be textual, ratified, archived, a Swedish delegate argued. The sky doesn't care about your filing cabinets, she retorted. Either we speak in fireworks or we surrender. They voted. She won by 2 votes. 40 nations pledged resources, shipping their finest pyrotechnics overnight to an abandoned airstrip in Nevada. Colors unknown to civilian shows, experimental compositions that burned aquamarine even in daylight, shells that could draw fine lines like fountain pens. She assembled a crew of guild artisans, a Russian patternist, a Ghanaian color chemist, a blind Japanese sound mapper who felt detonations through the soles of his feet. They had 36 hours left. Marisol designed the spectacle like a treaty etched in light. 1. Sky above 20 kilometers ceded to the firelights, her chosen term. 2. Air below 20 kilometers shared. Humans may transit with aircraft if flight paths are filed. 3. Firelights will descend for festivals only by invitation, performing strictly prescribed maneuvers. 4. In return, humanity will dedicate 2 days annually, aphelion and perihelion nights, to celebrate the firelight's birth, launching designated salutes to replenish their numbers. Each clause translated into motifs, spirals for distance limits, mirrored arcs for mutual passage, caged bursts for restricted zones, heartbeats of white strobes for festivals. On the eve of the deadline, the Nevada desert became a cathedral of crates and cables. Militias ringed the perimeter in case the firelights interpreted misfires as treachery. Half the world streamed the preparation. The other half huddled in makeshift shelters, praying. 20 minutes before dour, the firelights arrived, a trillion glints converging above the desert like glitter shaken onto black velvet. They hovered, waiting. Marisol stood in the command trailer, finger poised over the digital launch rack. Once we start, no interruptions, she told her team. Even a second gap could read as hesitation. The countdown hit 0. The desert sky blossomed with the first clause. 20-kilometer boundary. 100-meter-high comets lobbed upward, stopped dead, leaving trails that measured the height. They hung like golden measuring rods. The firelight scanned the display and responded by forming a ceiling exactly at the indicated line, acknowledging. Second clause. Shared lower sky. Marisol's team fired a sequence of blue rings that opened, split, then wove through each other without collision, symbolizing intersecting flight paths. Firelights mirrored, weaving strands of violet between rings, accepting. Third clause. Festival descent limitations. Red starbursts descended in stepwise tiers, halting at an imaginary city skyline drawn with silver fountains. They bowed, turned skyward again, illustrating perform and retreat. The firelights answered with jade comets that touched the fountain line and retreated, promising compliance. Fourth clause. Anniversary tribute. The crew unveiled its masterstroke, a chrysanthemum of impossible color, a spectral hue engineered by the Ghanaian chemist nicknamed Eighth Color. It looked somewhere between turquoise and lavender, a tint that made retinas hum. The shell burst, scattered seeds upward, each seed a microcharge set to ignite a second later. Those secondaries spelled, "We honor fire." The firelights quivered like a harp string plucked by wind. Then in a swoop they exploded, not in violence but in exultation. The entire mass cascaded downward, forming calligraphy so intricate it seemed impossible. Except. Cheers erupted from the ground crew, from the world's feeds, from packed basements thousands of miles away. But negotiations were not just acceptance. They required closure. Marisol launched the finale, an optional flourish she had kept secret, even from the UNA tribute to the firelight's origin. One by one, she fired 5 colossal shells, each a classic style from a different culture. Chinese brocade, Italian diadem, Brazilian palm tree, Greek cross, and Navajo star rug. They opened sequentially, overlaying cultures in shared sky, illustrating that humanity too was a lattice of sparks. The firelights watched. Then they added their own shape, a pattern unknown to human pyrotechnics. It started as a line, curled into a Mobius twist, and unfurled into infinity symbol. Lastly, they spelled, "We guard sky. We guard you." Not conquerors, Marisol realized. Guardians, volunteers to patrol the vacuum humanity could not yet fill. Fire birthed to protect its makers, demanding jurisdiction to do the job properly. When the last ember faded, dawn crept over the desert. The firelights ascended en masse, crossing the new 20-kilometer threshold, and settled into orbits humans named lantern rings. Satellite photos later revealed them circling Earth like scarves of living neon, shifting along atmospheric rivers, dissipating lightning, guiding migratory birds with luminous lanes. Aircraft filed revised flight plans, avoiding lanes designated Oriole Corridor. Life adapted quickly. Commercial airlines bragged about firelight-certified routes, promising passengers glimpses of sentient auroras. Poets wrote about twin skies, one of moisture and drones, one of gunpowder souls tracing equations just out of reach. On the first aphelion night, every major city launched tribute bursts at a standardized cue. The firelights responded with a synchronized bow, a circumglobal ring that pulsed once, twice, like planetary heartbeat. Marisol found herself promoted to head liaison, Sky Division, commuting between earthbound offices and remote mesas where fireworks could speak. She kept a bottle of vintage celebratory shells under her desk, reminders of when they were mute toys. She never lit them. Their place was memory. One particular evening, a year after first contact, she returned to Puerto Vallarta's Malecon. The city had invited the firelights to perform under Clause 3, celebrating the anniversary of the treaty. Marisol climbed the same observation deck where the cosmic pulse had first painted the sky. Tourists now sold glow sticks shaped like the infinity Mobius. Children scribbled in sparkler arcs that persisted digitally, captured by augmented reality filters. At 22:00 o'clock, a hush fell. The horizon ignited with firelight descent. They drifted down like luminous jellyfish, halting just above the water, adjusting brightness so as not to blind. They formed a sculptural diorama. The Earth, drawn in green sparks, around it a smaller white orb, a moon. Between, a path of orange comets, a future trajectory, humanity's path. Diego, standing beside her, whispered, "Do you think they're showing us where they'll help us go next?" Marisol squeezed his arm. "Or where we'll help each other go." The firelights rippled acknowledgement as though hearing. Turning to the fire, Harris, then they lifted, swirling into the grand finale. A waltz in 3/4 time, exactly the tempo of her first abortive celestial waltz, but extrapolated, starlight clusters rotating, trading partners, sweeping arcs across the gulf above Pacific waves. When it ended, they summoned letters one more time. "Thank you for the spark." Tears blurred her gaze. She remembered loading that first timid green willow shell and writing, "Hello." The simplest greeting had become a galactic handshake. She looked up through the parted rings into open space. For the first time since the flare, the sky felt neither hostile nor empty. It felt inhabited, and said by beings of flame and possibility, and bigger than any treaty could describe. Yet she flicked open her notebook, beginning draft 2, because languages grow, boundaries shift, and she knew treaties, like fireworks, must be renewed before they fade, rewritten in evolving constellations, signaling, again and again, "We are here. We see you. Let us keep the sky together."